The day had started like any other, with a quiet repetition of familiar routines that shaped the borders of my world. I moved through the kitchen, the gentle clatter of mugs and the low hum of the refrigerator a kind of background music to my solitude. My husband was gone for the day, leaving the house to its usual hush and the steady passage of time. The sunlight stretched across the floor, illuminating motes of dust that floated lazily in the air. I felt cocooned in the predictability of it all, wrapped in the dull comfort of a life well rehearsed. The knock at the door came in the middle of folding a pile of clean towels. I wasn't expecting anyone, so for a moment I just stood there, towel in hand, listening to the soft rap echo through the hallway. When I opened the door, there she was, my neighbor from across the street, holding a plastic laundry basket against her hip, hair still damp from a recent shower, skin flushed and eyes uncertain. She apologized, explained her washing machine had broken, asked if she could use mine. I heard myself say yes almost before she finished her question. I led her through the hallway to the laundry room, my mind racing with sudden awareness of the intimacy of the request. She moved with casual confidence, yet there was something tentative in the way she glanced around, as if unsure whether she was imposing. The basket held a mix of bright and pale clothes, soft fabrics, a forgotten scent of someone else's life woven into every piece. I showed her where everything was, the detergent, the machine, the basket for delicates. She thanked me, flashing a brief, grateful smile, and for a moment I caught a whiff of her perfume, something light and sweet that lingered in the narrow space. While she loaded the machine, I hovered awkwardly in the doorway, arms crossed, trying to seem busy but finding it impossible not to notice the way the light played across her bare shoulders. She was wrapped in nothing but a large white towel, the edges tucked in carefully above her chest, leaving most of her back and arms exposed. Droplets of water still clung to her skin, catching the light in tiny, glimmering beads. I was aware, suddenly, of how ordinary and extraordinary the moment felt, my neighbor, nearly naked, moving through my home as if she belonged here. She closed the lid and turned to me, asking how long the cycle would take. I answered, voice quieter than I intended, feeling self-conscious under her gaze. She seemed completely at ease, unbothered by her lack of clothing, settling onto the edge of the couch in the living room while she waited. I offered her a cup of tea, trying to disguise my own nerves by clinging to hospitality. She accepted, pulling the towel more tightly around herself as she leaned back, crossing her legs and letting her hair fall forward as she spoke. The scent of fresh laundry began to drift through the house, mingling with her perfume, with the faint trace of soap on her skin, with my own restless anticipation. As I moved around the kitchen preparing tea, I stole glances at her, the shape of her body beneath the towel, the ease with which she occupied the space, the contrast between her bare skin and the soft fabric. The simplicity of the domestic task felt suddenly charged. I found myself wondering what she thought of my house, my life, whether she noticed the loneliness that settled in the corners or the careful way I arranged everything. I felt a flush rise to my cheeks as I carried the tea back to the living room, hands trembling just a little as I set the mug in front of her. She smiled at me, eyes warm and open, and for a moment the ordinary boundaries between us felt thinner than usual, as if something unexpected might be waiting on the other side. She sat across from me on the sofa, her bare legs curled under her, the towel forming shifting folds around her body every time she moved. The steam from her tea curled in the sunlight, filling the air with a soft, herbal warmth that mixed with the scent of her skin. I tried to focus on my own cup, wrapping my hands around the heat, grounding myself in the simple act of sipping, but my attention kept drifting back to her. She seemed relaxed, her body language open and unguarded, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to sit in a near stranger's house wearing nothing but a towel. The conversation began with small, harmless things, broken appliances, work frustrations, neighborhood gossip. But beneath it all, I felt a low, humming energy, something unspoken that hovered in the pauses between sentences. She laughed at something I said, her head tilting back, throat exposed, and for a moment I just watched her. I found myself mesmerized by the curve of her neck, the shimmer of water still lingering in her hair, the way her lips parted as she caught her breath. She shifted slightly and the towel slipped, revealing a glimpse of her thigh before she casually adjusted it again. My gaze darted away, my cheeks hot, but I couldn't keep myself from looking again, each stolen glance feeding something restless inside me. The sound of the washing machine working in the background became a strange kind of soundtrack to the moment. I noticed how comfortable she seemed in my space, as if she had always belonged here, barefoot and content. Every movement she made seemed to echo in my chest, a leg stretching out, toes flexing, a hand running absent-mindedly along her arm. The edges of the towel rode higher each time she moved, not in a deliberate way, but as if she simply didn't care what was seen. The domestic comfort of tea and conversation began to feel like a fragile cover for the growing tension I sensed in every glance, every pause. There was a moment when she reached for the remote and the towel parted enough to reveal the soft curve of her hip. I looked away, but not before my eyes lingered a second too long, my pulse quickening in my throat. I tried to distract myself with questions, with small talk, but the space between us felt charged, as if the air itself had thickened, making it harder to breathe. She seemed to sense it, her glances growing longer, her smiles a little softer, the line between casual and intentional blurring in a way I hadn't expected. She drew her knees to her chest, hugging them loosely, and leaned her head back against the cushion, eyes half closed in contentment or something like it. I studied the curve of her calf, the delicate arch of her foot, the faint shimmer of her skin where the sunlight caught it. Every detail was suddenly important, as if I was storing it away for later, memorizing her without meaning to. She set her mug down on the table, fingers lingering on the handle, and in that small, languid gesture I felt a sense of invitation that made my breath hitch. The cycle of the washing machine neared its end, the final spin rattling faintly through the floorboards, but neither of us moved. I realized I didn't want this moment to end, didn't want her to gather her clothes and disappear back into the world outside. There was a sense of possibility in the air, quiet and trembling, like a secret we both almost understood but hadn't dared to name. The warmth in the room grew deeper, settling between us, drawing me closer to a boundary I never imagined I would want to cross. The sound of the washing machine finally faded, a soft mechanical lull that signaled the end of her visit, but neither of us moved right away. I sat perfectly still, aware of every inch of space between us, every quiet breath. She stretched, the towel shifting again, exposing more of her thigh and hip, and I felt a flutter of nervous anticipation ripple through me. She rose from the sofa, moving toward the laundry room with an easy grace, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. I followed her, unable to resist the gentle pull of her presence, my heart beating faster with every step. In the small, bright laundry room, she reached for the washer, opening the door and leaning forward. Her back was to me, the towel loose and precarious, and for a moment I watched the play of muscles beneath her skin, the subtle line of her spine. I stepped closer, pretending to help as she pulled out a handful of damp clothes, our hands brushing. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt through me. She didn't look at me, didn't flinch, just handed me a shirt, her fingers lingering a second longer than necessary. I took it, my hands trembling, my breath shallow. She straightened, arms full of laundry, and turned, her eyes meeting mine with a look that was direct and searching. In the narrow space between us, the air felt heavy, dense with everything unspoken. She brushed past me, her bare shoulder gliding along my arm, the towel slipping even further, and my skin prickled with electricity. For a heartbeat I stood frozen, stunned by the intensity of wanting that crashed over me in a single, blinding wave. She set the laundry basket on the counter and paused, one hand steadying herself. The towel clung to her body in a way that felt both accidental and intimate, revealing more with every movement. I reached for a stray sock, my hand brushing against her wrist, and this time she didn't move away. The contact was small, ordinary, but in that moment it felt monumental. My fingers traced the delicate bone beneath her skin, memorizing the texture, the heat, the impossible softness. The room seemed to shrink around us, every sound muffled except for the shallow cadence of our breathing. I could see the rise and fall of her chest, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her lips parted as if she might say something but didn't. The urge to touch her grew unbearable, and before I could stop myself, my hand drifted from her wrist up along her arm, feeling the fine hairs, the warmth, the quiet invitation. She closed her eyes briefly, a faint shiver passing through her body, and I knew she felt it too. She shifted slightly, her body turning toward me, and for a moment we just stood there, so close I could smell the clean, floral scent of her shampoo and the underlying warmth of her skin. I let my hand rest on her shoulder, fingers curving gently into her damp hair, and she leaned into my touch, sighing softly. The towel fell lower, exposing more of her back, and I traced the line of her spine with trembling fingertips, marveling at the tenderness of the moment. There was no rush, no urgency, only the slow unfolding of something inevitable. The way her body pressed closer to mine, the soft friction of skin against skin, the silent conversation that passed between our hands. My senses sharpened, overwhelmed by the reality of her warmth, her scent, the whisper of her breath against my cheek. In that small laundry room, the boundaries of my old life blurred, replaced by the hush of new possibility, the delicate promise of touch. Time seemed to slow as we stood there, so close that the heat from her body felt like it was radiating directly into my skin. My hand lingered at the small of her back, trembling with a mixture of fear and longing that made every movement feel both impossible and necessary. The towel hung in a loose spiral at her waist, threatening to fall with the smallest shift. I could see the quick flutter of her pulse at her neck, the gentle flush rising across her chest, the way her lips parted in a silent invitation I'd never imagined before this moment. She stepped forward, closing the last sliver of distance between us, and I let my hand slide along her side, marveling at the smoothness, the warmth, the delicate line where hip met waist. The towel finally slipped to the floor, soundless, a white pool around her feet, leaving her utterly bare before me in the soft, diffused light of the room. I felt my own breath catch as my fingers skimmed over her hips and up her ribs, committing every curve to memory. The world outside ceased to exist, there was only the intimacy of this small space and the exquisite vulnerability between us. My mouth found her shoulder, the taste of her skin salty and clean beneath my lips. Her hands wandered up my back, fingertips mapping the familiar terrain as if it were all new. The sensation of her touch set my nerves alight, each gentle stroke and hesitant squeeze a question and an answer at once. She pressed closer, her body fitting against mine as if we'd practiced this 1,000 times in dreams. I explored her slowly, my hands and lips learning her, discovering the hidden softness at the base of her neck, the sensitive dip of her waist, the heat that pooled between her thighs. We moved together in a kind of slow-burning urgency, guided more by instinct than thought. My clothing fell away in pieces, each layer discarded with reverence, as if undressing were a ritual, a promise, a silent confession. I pressed her against the counter, the cool surface beneath her bare skin contrasting sharply with the feverish warmth between us. Her breath hitched as I traced the inside of her thigh, as I pressed kisses along her hip bone, as I drew her body closer and felt her shudder in response. The world had narrowed to a field of sensation, her hair slipping through my fingers, the pressure of her hands pulling me closer, the slick heat of her skin against mine. I lost myself in the details, the pulse beneath my tongue, the sound of her breath in my ear, the exquisite tension that coiled tighter with every lingering caress. When I finally touched her in the places she needed most, she melted against me, her body arching, her fingers knotting in my hair as waves of pleasure overtook her. The boundaries between us vanished completely, replaced by a single, shared rhythm, touch and sound and trembling breath. I felt myself unravel, swept along by the fire we had sparked and fanned into something unstoppable. We held each other, skin to skin, the heat between us burning away every hesitation, every question, until there was nothing left but the certainty of this moment, and the afterglow of everything we had finally dared to feel. Morning arrived gently, pressing through the curtains as a diffuse, forgiving light that seemed to hush every sharp edge left from the night before. The first thing I became aware of was the sensation of warmth, her bare skin still pressed against mine, a tangle of arms and legs beneath the soft weight of blankets we'd pulled over us at some point. Her breathing was steady, slow, almost childlike in its peacefulness. I lay still, feeling the weight of her thigh draped over my hip, her hand curled softly near my shoulder, her hair splayed across the pillow in a dark, silken fan. The intimacy of the previous hours lingered in the room, in the faint scent of her skin, in the small, tender aches that pulsed through my body with every breath. There was no rush to move, no instinct to recoil or cover myself, only the quiet astonishment that such closeness could feel so right. I studied her face in the morning light, the delicate arch of her brow, the way her lips were parted in sleep, the hint of a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. It struck me that she looked younger now, less guarded, as if some heavy thing inside her had been lifted in the night. I let my fingers trail lightly across her shoulder, memorizing the landscape of her skin, the soft dip where her neck met her collarbone, the faint pulse that fluttered there. I traced slow, invisible lines, not to wake her, but to remind myself this was real, that the boundaries I'd carried for so many years had quietly fallen away. My mind wandered through images of what we'd shared, each touch, each gasp, the way she had looked at me as if I was both familiar and brand new. Outside the window, the world was unchanged. I heard a distant car, the calls of birds, the hum of early activity starting in other people's lives. But inside this room, time felt suspended, as if we existed in a pocket of possibility the world could not touch. I tried to imagine what I might say to her if she woke, what words would be honest and enough, but nothing came. The moment was too fragile for language, built from the silent understanding of bodies at rest and hearts still racing from what had passed between us. There was no need to justify, no urge to explain. I only wanted to stay, to let this new version of myself settle and root before the demands of the day pulled me back into old patterns. Eventually I slid quietly from the bed, moving slowly to avoid disturbing her. My body felt both heavy and light, marked by her touch in ways both visible and hidden. I stood in front of the mirror, seeing the faint traces of last night, the imprint of her hands on my hips, the softness in my eyes, the subtle glow that seemed to linger beneath my skin. For a long moment, I simply watched myself, marveling at the unfamiliar feeling of being wanted, of being seen. I wrapped a robe around my shoulders and stepped into the hallway, every step echoing with the secret I now carried. In the kitchen, I moved through the old rituals, filling the kettle, scooping coffee grounds, feeling a careful joy in the repetition of tasks I'd performed countless times before. Everything seemed subtly transformed, the brush of fabric against my thighs, the gentle ache at the base of my spine, the memory of her voice murmuring my name in the dark. The sound of running water, the sunlight shifting across the counter, all of it felt heightened, important, like evidence of something precious and private. I set 2 mugs on the table, not knowing if she would join me, but hoping she would. When she finally appeared, still wrapped in a sheet, hair tousled and eyes half closed with sleep, my heart fluttered. She smiled at me, a slow, knowing smile, and crossed the floor to stand close, her warmth radiating into the space between us. We didn't speak at first. She pressed her body against mine, resting her head on my shoulder, and I closed my eyes, letting myself savor the comfort and certainty of her touch. For a moment, I simply breathed her in, grounding myself in the knowledge that she was here, that last night was not a dream, that what had begun between us could belong to the real world. We drank our coffee side by side, feet touching beneath the table, sharing a series of small, quiet glances, a new language built from everything that no longer needed to be hidden. I watched her reach for the sugar, watched the curve of her hand as she lifted her mug, saw the faint, reddish marks left by my mouth on her neck. The ache of longing had been replaced by a softer, deeper wanting, a need not just for her body, but for the easy intimacy that flowed between us like sunlight. I thought about how easily life could slip back into old patterns, how quickly the outside world might intrude, but for now I refused to let it. I clung to the hush of the morning, the simplicity of our togetherness, the way our laughter, tentative at first, then freer, filled the kitchen with something bright and honest. She spoke softly about her plans for the day, about little things she wanted to do, and I listened with new ears, noticing how her voice seemed to linger in the air, how her presence made the house feel less empty, more alive. Later, she slipped away to dress, gathering her clothes from the laundry basket with a playful smile. I watched her, heart full, and realized that this was the first time in years I had woken up with the certainty that I did not want to be anywhere else. The fear that had ruled me, the fear of being found out, of being wrong, of wanting too much, had faded with the darkness, replaced by a tentative hope. I let myself imagine a future shaped by mornings like this one, by the echo of her laughter in my rooms, by the knowledge that my life could hold more than what I'd allowed. As I cleared our mugs and opened the windows to let in the fresh air, I understood that something essential had shifted. The boundaries I had drawn to protect myself had dissolved in her arms. The home I had kept so carefully ordered was now colored by possibility, touched by risk and desire and the fierce, tender truth of being truly seen. I stood in the quiet light of the kitchen, feeling the pulse of a new day in my chest, and for the first time in a long time, I did not look away. The days that followed unfolded in a way that felt both delicate and strangely inevitable, like waking up inside a dream I had spent my whole life denying myself. Every ordinary moment seemed charged with a new kind of electricity. The rhythm of my routines, those carefully maintained patterns that once gave me a sense of safety, felt altered, as if someone had changed the key of a familiar song. I found myself moving through my home with a heightened awareness, noticing the small remnants of her everywhere. Her scent lingered on the towels in the bathroom, her toothbrush sat beside mine in the holder, her laughter echoed faintly from the night before as if it had soaked into the walls. The sight of her coffee mug left next to the sink in the morning sent a ripple of warmth through me, a silent assurance that the intimacy we'd found was not some fleeting fantasy but something real that continued to grow between us. I became attuned to her presence, waiting for the sound of her voice in the hallway, the pattern of her footsteps on the stairs, the gentle knock she gave before entering the bedroom. We slipped into new habits without ever needing to name them. She would join me at the kitchen table in the mornings, her bare feet brushing against mine under the wood, our knees touching and separating, the simple contact more honest and necessary than any conversation. In the evenings, she would settle beside me on the couch, legs draped over my lap, her fingers tracing invisible circles on my arm as we watched television, the outside world reduced to a distant hum beyond our windows. There was an easiness to the way our lives began to braid together, a sense that I no longer needed to edit myself for anyone's comfort, not even my own. I found joy in the chaos she brought, the way she left her books scattered across the coffee table, her shoes haphazardly kicked off at the door, the faint melody she hummed while washing dishes. These signs of her living here filled me with a tenderness I had never expected. I felt more like myself in her presence than I ever had alone or even with my husband, as if I'd stepped into a truer version of my own skin. I no longer waited for guilt to catch up to me. At first, I thought it would arrive quietly, in the hours just before dawn or in the silent moments between conversation, but instead I found only clarity. I would lie awake sometimes, listening to her breath in the dark, thinking about the path that had led us here, marveling at how simply the rules of my life had been rewritten. There were times when I missed the predictability of before, the sense of order, the absence of risk, but those thoughts faded quickly, replaced by the richness of what I now held in my arms. I realized that safety and happiness were not the same thing. The steady, measured existence I'd clung to for so long had kept me from reaching for anything more, had convinced me that contentment was enough, that longing was dangerous. But lying with her, I understood that the only real danger was in never allowing myself to want. Our intimacy grew deeper in ways that surprised me, shaped by trust and laughter and a gentle kind of playfulness that made the air in the house feel lighter. She would sneak up behind me while I was cooking, wrapping her arms around my waist, her face pressed into the curve of my neck as she whispered nonsense just to make me smile. I would find her reading in bed late at night, glasses perched on her nose, hair falling forward, and slip under the covers beside her, letting my hand find hers in the quiet dark. We touched often, not just in passion but in comfort, her palm resting on my thigh as we drove together to the store, her fingers brushing mine in the market as we chose fruit, her head leaning against my shoulder during long, sleepy afternoons. There were difficult moments too, flashes of doubt that caught me off guard. I worried about what would happen if anyone knew, about the questions that might come, the judgments I would not be able to deflect. I worried about my marriage, about the fragile structure of the life I'd built, about how everything I had accepted as unchangeable could so easily shift and collapse. Sometimes, I saw the hesitation in her eyes as well, a vulnerability that mirrored my own. But those moments never lasted. Each time, she would reach for me, or I would reach for her, and in the warmth of our embrace the fear would melt away. We built our own rituals for reassurance, a kiss on the back of the hand, a whispered word before sleep, the simple act of waking up together in the same bed. As the days stretched into weeks, I learned how to let go. I stopped keeping secrets from myself. I allowed myself to want her openly, to hope for more, to imagine futures that once felt forbidden. Our relationship was not defined by a single night, or even by a single choice, but by the slow, deliberate accumulation of trust, by the daily courage to choose each other in spite of uncertainty. With her, I rediscovered the quiet joy of anticipation, the thrill of waking up each morning not knowing exactly how the day would unfold, only that I would not have to face it alone. The change within me was subtle but absolute. I noticed it in the way I looked at myself in the mirror, in the ease with which I laughed, in the gentleness with which I moved through my days. The walls I had built for protection now seemed unnecessary, replaced by something softer, more porous, more alive. I was no longer just performing the role of a wife or a neighbor, I was living as a woman who had chosen, at last, to risk her heart. One night, as we stood together at the window watching a summer storm sweep through the street, she wrapped her arms around me from behind and rested her chin on my shoulder. The rain streaked the glass in glimmering lines, lightning flickered on her skin, and I felt an overwhelming sense of belonging, of having found something I did not know I was searching for. In her arms, I understood that the greatest transformations are born from the smallest acts of courage, the willingness to be vulnerable, to reach out, to love without a script. The future was still uncertain, but I was no longer afraid of change. I welcomed it, held it close, let it shape me anew. In the embrace of this new life, I finally allowed myself to be happy, to love fully, and to step forward into whatever tomorrow might bring, no longer alone but profoundly, unapologetically changed.